Okay, everybody, sorry for the late reply. Hopefully, you can hear me. So, anybody who doesn't know, I'm a COVID 19 long hauler. I've been sharing my story since Easter Sunday. One of the first things that I shared that saved my life was a drug called endomethacin. Shortly after, I got recruited into groups with doctors and researchers from all over the world. Um, the Math Plus protocol has been out for a little bit. It's been on CNN. It's been on multiple, outlets, and they seem to stop talking about it. But there's an update, and I have the video I want to share with you to understand. They're going to break it down to you guys, really break it down to you. It's not me. I'm going to let the doctors speak. I'm going to let them update because every drug, every medication, every generic that I've been talking about that can treat this thing earlier, you're going to hear it from their mouth right now. So I'm going to turn this off of myself and put the video on because I want you guys to hear this, write all this stuff down, share this video. It's about time to make this go live.
Hello, everyone. This video is about protecting the world from the coronavirus that has infected nearly 50 million people and killed more than 1 million people worldwide since it first appeared in China less than a year ago. And now in November 2020, when we're recording this, the cases are surging again. There are more than 500,000 new cases worldwide every day, many of them here in the United States. This video is about what we can do to try to prevent the disease known as COVID-19 and to treat it early so that people who become infected do not wind up rushed to a hospital unable to breathe. I'm Betsy Ashton. I'm a former CBS News correspondent, now retired and working as an artist and a writer who signed on to help a group of mostly critical care physicians and teachers who have been very effectively treating serious COVID patients in hospitals, in ICUs around the United States. They have also taught other doctors how to do likewise using a protocol that uses effective, readily available, FDA-approved drugs that are inexpensive, that are safe, that they are out there, that have been used in hospitals for decades. The details of their hospital protocol that we dubbed Math Plus, which stands for the methylprednisolone, ascorbic acid, thiamine, and heparin, plus some other elements that are mixed in with it for different patients. That is our treatment for hospitalized patients, and it's on our website. You can see that. You can direct your doctor to see that at flccc.net. That stands for Frontline COVID-19 Critical Care.net. But today, two of these critical care physicians are here to talk about the iMask Plus protocol that they've just developed, which is for prevention, for prophylaxis, and for early treatment of the disease. Hopefully will keep you out of the hospital. Why listen to this particular group of doctors? Because they've been right all along on their recommended treatments, despite authorities that won't recommend anything until after randomized controlled trials are done on them. But we're in the middle of a pandemic, and these doctors have been reading everything worldwide and making recommendations based on the best available evidence that's there at a time of emergency. They are experts in their field. They have decades of experience. Among them, they have published more than 1,000 articles in prestigious medical journals, international journals. All of the details of their publications and their credentials are on the flccc.net website. But I want to introduce you to two of them here today. Dr. Paul Marik, he is a longtime professor of medicine and the mentor to many in the Alliance and the person who really drafted a lot of the protocol. And Dr. Pierre Kory, who has taught medicine for many years at the University of Wisconsin and now is treating patients at a leading hospital in Milwaukee. Gentlemen, let's get right with it. What is this iMask Plus protocol, and how does it prevent or treat COVID-19?
I think it's important to recognize that there's no single magic bullet and there's no single cure for COVID. What we believe is, as we know, patients go through different phases. And in each of these phases, we believe that you need to use a combination of therapies. And these are drugs that are readily available, cheap, and safe. So, we first focus on Math Plus, which was the treatment for really sick people in the hospital. But we realized our goal actually is to prevent people getting into the hospital. We want to keep people healthy. We want to prevent them getting sick and progressing to the phase they need to go to the ICU. So we believe that there are interventions that people out there can do to limit their chances of getting COVID. We think that is really so important. So what we have put together is the iMask protocol. So the center is using a mask. While people argue about a mask, if you have a mask, you protect yourself and you protect your fellow beings. This is not a political thing. This is a moral and social and ethical thing. You want to do everything in your power to prevent getting COVID and spreading COVID. And then on top of that, we have a number of readily available medications which can improve your immune system and help limit your chances of getting COVID. And then there are some, depending on your risk group, there's a medication called ivermectin, which we recommend in people who are extremely high risk of getting COVID as a prophylactic measure. We also recommend it in people who have contact. So we know that if one of your family members has COVID, you have a 50% chance of getting COVID. That is remarkably high. This scientific data shows unequivocally, if you prophylax these people with ivermectin, you can reduce that to about 7 to 10%. So ivermectin has emerged as a really interesting and useful medication. But as I said, we don't recommend it alone and in isolation. Vitamin D is very important, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere as we move into winter. Sun exposure goes down, people's vitamin D status goes down. So we know that elderly people, obese people, people who spend their time indoors are vitamin D deficient. It's really important. If you are vitamin D deficient or insufficient, it increases your risk of getting COVID and dying from COVID. It's as simple as that. Vitamin D is a simple and cheap intervention which can limit your risk of dying from COVID. There's nothing more simple than that. And I think it's a travesty that the medical community has not embraced this. It's a travesty that the world community has not embraced this. In addition, we know that melatonin taken at night, which is used for sleep, limits your risk of getting COVID. This was demonstrated nicely in a clinical study. And we know melatonin has numerous benefits in prophylaxis and treatment of patients who may get COVID. In addition to that, we would recommend vitamin C and quercetin. Quercetin is a plant phytochemical. You get it in apples and onions. And what's interesting about quercetin, it has antiviral and antiviral properties. In addition, it's what we call a zinc ionophore. So we'll talk, the next piece we recommend is zinc. Zinc prevents replication of the virus, but zinc has to get into the cell. Quercetin helps it get into the cell. So we have what we call the eye mask protocol, which includes a mask, vitamin C, vitamin D, quercetin, zinc, and in people at high risk, ivermectin. In addition, people who get COVID right at the early phase, you want to prevent this disease progressing. This is not rocket science. You want patients who have mild COVID progressing to severe COVID and progressing to death. That's not a good outcome. And we know if you give ivermectin early, you can prevent that trajectory. So our appeal is, please, we have to do everything possible to limit patients or people getting COVID. And those who get COVID, this is not the flu. You want to treat yourself early and you want to prevent this progressing. And apart from dying, which obviously is not a good outcome, we now know that patients who get COVID have long-term symptoms, and these may go on for months or even years. So the fact that you got COVID and recovered does not mean you're not going to have problems. So that's kind of my introduction. I hope it's not too complicated. I think it's a simple protocol. The point is that these are readily available drugs. They are safe. They are safe and they're cheap. And there's no reason why people across the entire world can't embrace this protocol.
Thank you. Let's bring Dr. Corey in here to sum up this a little bit more as to what it is and how do we get it? How do we get the protocol? And also, do you really think that this will overcome the virus worldwide?
So I think that it has potential to, and I just want to, I'm going to piggyback on things that Dr. Marik said, which is when we first started, obviously we're ICU experts who predominantly practice medicine in the hospital, in the sickest of the patients who are in the intensive care unit. As a group, we really were focused on treating those terribly ill patients who were coming to us from the first days of the pandemic. And it's only, to Dr. Marik's credit, he's always been interested in, and he's been providing some recommendations and advice for more of the prophylactic, preventive, early treatment before the hospital in order to try to what I would say, mitigate or decrease the severity. And we wanted to focus more on the hospital because we had so many studies and evidence and experience with the medicines we were using. But what's changed lately is that, again, Dr. Marik, when we were reviewing, we've been constantly reviewing data, sending papers ever since the first days of the pandemic. And recently, we reviewed all of the studies that have come out, which have actually removed so many of the therapeutics that have been tried. So things like convalescent plasma and tocilizumab and these synthetic antibody treatments and hydroxychloroquine and drugs like Kaletra, they've all been disproven. Remdesivir even, all of the trials now show they really have no benefit. And at the same time that happened, Dr. Marik was reviewing some of this very recently emerging data on this drug called ivermectin. And it seems like, I don't want to sound too dramatic, but just when all hope is lost for a therapeutic, ivermectin popped up. And the story behind it and the data behind it is something, just short of incredible. Let me say a couple of things about that evidence. So number one, I think it was April or May, a group of researchers in Australia published a paper, and it was just an in vitro paper. And it showed this dramatic impact of ivermectin in killing virus and preventing virus replication in a cell culture. And on that study alone, some interesting thing happened. Because everybody in the whole world was desperate to try something that would work, many regions of the world saw that paper and started using ivermectin based solely on a basic science experiment in cell culture. And we know as physicians that the history of medicine is littered with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of things that work in a test tube or in a lab, but when you try to bring it to the bedside and have it work in a patient, very few medicines can span that gap. And that's what the story of ivermectin is seeming to show, that it's not only working at the bench, it's working in an animal model, it's working as a prophylactic agent in preventing transmission, as Dr. Marik pointed out. Now trials are emerging that it's working in mild illness, preventing deterioration into the hospital. There's a number of trials now showing that even in the hospital, even that late in the disease course, and it's a multi-phase disease, we're still seeing that it's having tremendous clinical impacts. And then the final piece of the puzzle is that there's all this emerging epidemiologic data from all those regions where those health ministers started pumping ivermectin into the population, just distributing it widely in the hopes that they could decrease the death rates. And sure enough, when you look at that, the timing of when those distribution campaigns started and the death rates and the case counts, you're seeing really dramatic impacts. And so because of all of that, the five of us sort of followed Paul, and we started reviewing the literature right along with them. We started finding more and more, and we started doing what we do, which is try to figure stuff out. And so that's when we decided to get behind and come together as a group and put together an outpatient protocol.
This is very exciting. There's only one problem. How do I'd like to be protected. I live in New York City. I'm around people. How do we get this? We go to our doctor. What if the doctor says, and we know doctors have said this, there's not enough evidence out there, no randomized controlled trials on this yet. I'm not going to prescribe it. How do we get it?
So that's a topic that's we have been faced with over and over and over again. And it centers around this question of what is sufficient evidence to adopt a practice. And I have to say, I want to be fair to all my colleagues, is that as physicians, we exist on a spectrum of risk tolerance and the certainty of knowledge. Some of us are much more willing to adopt a practice just on a risk-benefit profile where it's extremely, extremely safe. The amount of evidence that's published in order to support its use, we generally correspondingly have it as a relatively low. In cases where medicines are high expense or high risk, obviously we have to be much more cautious and wait for more significant data. But I'll tell you, the definition of what sufficient evidence is different for doctors. So someone out there may ask their doctor, and the doctor may not be convinced of the data. However, what I would suggest is on our website, we have compiled a quick summary of the evidence, and there are trials. There's a number of trials. There's at least 4 randomized controlled trials in the early outpatient. There's 3 to 4 observational and randomized controlled trials in the hospital population. And there are now 2 randomized controlled trials and 1 observation controlled trial showing dramatic reduction in transmission rates. The evidence is there, it's accumulating, and it's accumulating rapidly, and it's quite convincing. And so I would share that with their doctor, but ultimately you do have to get the medicines from your doctor. It's the doctor's decision on whether he or she thinks that it's will be helpful and if it's indicated in your case. But I believe the evidence is there, and that's what we're trying to help with. Is we're trying to share these insights and share the accumulating evidence in support of this intervention.
I want to go back to Dr. Marik. This is very good to know. Ivermectin has been around a long time. My dog actually takes it. It's a puppy worming thing. Veterinarians use it all the time. People in Africa have been using it in all the tropics against all kinds of tropical diseases that are caused by parasites. And so when they say it's safe, it's because we know that it has been used in so many populations. And now, of course, you're saying that the evidence is coming in COVID. But the question that I have for you, if somebody goes to their doctor and their doctor is not ready to prescribe it, and they really want the protection because the evidence is looking very good by a group of experts such as you, so we send the doctor to the flccc.net website to get more information where the evidence is there. what can this person do? If the doctors won't prescribe it and the person says, oh, I can get that from my vet, what are you going to tell them?
Yeah, so before I get to that question, maybe to put it in perspective, and I think Dr. Corey did this. So ivermectin has been used in humans since 1987. We have over 40 years experience with ivermectin. We know that almost 4 billion, that is with a B, 4 billion people across this planet have been treated with ivermectin, and it's been used as an antiparasitic. And we know it is extremely safe. Extremely safe. It's very difficult actually to find any side effects or complications from ivermectin. The reason is they don't exist. It is probably one of the safest medicines you can give a human being. And you can give humans up to 10 to 20 times the recommended dose, and they do not get side effects. It so happens ivermectin is on the WHO, the World Health Organization's list of essential medications. That's how important the WHO think it is for treating parasitic infections. What have we figured out? Ivermectin treats SARS-CoV-2. It's as effective as treating parasites as it is treating SARS-CoV-2. This was given to us on a platter. We need to take advantage of this. It can completely change the natural history of this disease. So getting back to your question, I think the biggest problem is that there's been so much misinformation about COVID in general and the treatments in particular. Dr. Corey will know, starting from March the 13th, 2020, we were recommending the use of corticosteroids because we knew they worked. And this was based on our understanding of the disease and our understanding of corticosteroids. The WHO, the NIH, the CDC, and every organization said, do not use steroids, they're dangerous. And that was up until May the 27th. We now know that corticosteroids save lives. Let me say that again. Corticosteroids save lives. The editor of New England Journal called Dr. Corey lucky. No, we were not lucky. We were wise. We knew what worked. This was based on deep understanding of the disease. This was based on understanding of corticosteroids. This was based on understanding of medical therapeutics. This was based on our experience at the bedside. This was not luck. This was a combination of science plus clinical wisdom. And we think the same applies to ivermectin and vitamin D. And what we need is the world to wake up. We cannot wait any longer. We are facing a crisis. As you just said, over 500,000 people are getting this disease every day. While randomized controlled trials do have a role, when patients are dying like flies, I think it is unethical to randomize a patient to placebo when you potentially have a therapeutic agent that can save their life. So what we need to do is educate physicians, because they're the ones that are going to prescribe the ivermectin. We don't want patients going out trying to get it from wherever. So they need to go to their physician and say to them, please, I want you to prescribe ivermectin. If the doctors say, well, there's not sufficient evidence, you say, firstly, go look at the evidence, don't be ignorant. And secondly, how much evidence do you need? What is the point where you say we have sufficient evidence? And as Dr. Corey said, it's a risk-benefit ratio based on the cost and safety of the drug. We know it is safe, we know it is cheap, we know it is effective. So the question is, do we need to wait 3, 4, 5, 6 months for a randomized controlled trial to know what we already know now? Just like corticosteroids, which we knew months again, I would say it's unethical to do such a thing. If it was your child, your mother, your father, you would want them to get placebo. So my point is, I think clinicians and leaders have to look at what is in our box of tools to treat COVID. And it's not remdesivir alone. If you look at the most recent NIH recommendation, all you see on that is remdesivir. Remdesivir is a drug which we now know has very little clinical utility. So I think it's time for physicians and thought leaders across the world to wake up. We are facing a crisis of monumental proportion, and we got to do something now. So my answer is we have to educate doctors and thought leaders across the world.
I just want to emphasize that by having this discussion with your physician, I think you could help change this trajectory, because the more physicians that are engaged and look at the evidence and review the evidence and look at the side effect profile and the potential upside, and the more that they start prescribing, I think the better everyone will do. And so I would tell patients that, you know, this is a discussion that you want to initiate with your physician.
I want to clarify something, because I remember you saying ivermectin is for the people who feel highly at risk. That would be older people like me, somebody in a nursing home perhaps, somebody with comorbidities. We know diabetes, we know that heart trouble, people with these troubles are at high risk, might want to take the ivermectin as a preventive. What about other people who are younger? What about children? Are they just fine taking the vitamin C, the vitamin D, and zinc and quercetin? And if they're taking the zinc, we've had some questions. What zinc? There's a lot of different zinc out there over the counter.
In terms of children, I think kids need to do whatever social distancing, whatever public health measures prevent them to get infection. There's no question that these big gatherings are absolutely unacceptable. It's just these are super spreading events. So kids and adolescents need to show some kind of social responsibility. So social distancing and masks is really important. In addition, I would give kiddie vitamins, particularly as we're going into winter. Kids don't get enough sunshine. I would, get kiddie-sized vitamins, which have the right dose, and I would give them vitamins, vitamin C, vitamin D. I wouldn't use these antiviral agents on kids, but we know that they can get sick and they can spread the disease. So, I think when you look at this, you have to look at, people 16 years and younger, or 18 years and younger, and those older than that. In terms of zinc, we're not sure what the exact dose is, but I think in a dose of 30 to 50 milligrams a day, that's fine. As I said before, we're not suggesting one single agent alone. It's really important. So if you're taking zinc together with quercetin, which actually happens to be a zinc ionophore, you're actually doing double the effect using them together. Whether you give a lozenge or a tablet or a suppository or you put it in the ear, I don't think it matters. As long as you take 30 to 50 milligrams a day, I think that's fine. But it's not you're not taking it as monotherapy. You're using it in combination with this composite program to improve the patient's general well-being.
Are there any drug interactions that are of concern? There's been some mention of benzodiazepine. Is there any group that should stay away from it that's on something special? Or again, they discuss this with their doctor?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I did get some emails from people because apparently Wikipedia, and just to be clear, Wikipedia is quite good, but it's not a definitive source of medical information. And I think people must be very, very careful where they get the information from. So Wikipedia lists corticosteroids and benzodiazepines as a contraindication. We have searched the literature from top to bottom and have been unable to find any evidence that this is true. There was also some talk, now I'm not saying to drink alcohol, but there were some people saying there's a bad interaction with alcohol. And in fact, there was a study done in an African country which specifically looked, was there an interaction between alcohol and ivermectin? The answer is no. So we do not know of a single drug that actually has an adverse interaction with ivermectin, which is really important. And I think it attests to the safety of the drug.
Yeah, I'll add one thing to that. Going back to what Paul said about 4 billion doses have been taken across the world, or 4 billion people. You know, in the pharmaceutical databases, which catalog all of the adverse interactions, with 40 years of experience and 4 billion patients taking it, if there was an important interaction with any of the medications that we just mentioned, it would definitely be cataloged. When you actually look at the list of side effects for ivermectin, it's one of the shortest lists you can find for any therapeutic. In fact, the only meaningful interaction that needs to be avoided is actually with 2 different vaccines. I think one is cholera and one is dengue. I can't remember the 2 exactly, but it's just with the vaccine. So I just want to emphasize just how almost miraculously safe this is. Because if we were talking about a drug that had different properties than the really reassuring ones that we're talking about with low cost, safety, availability, it would be a much different conversation. So I just thankfully we have a therapeutic here that looks to be really widely applicable.
How long can you take this? You're on a preventive. Obviously you can keep taking vitamins, but if you're concerned that the disease is around, or if you're a high-risk elderly person, can you take ivermectin over weeks and weeks and weeks and months?
Well, I don't have that experience treating patients over weeks to months. I again will fall back on its history of tolerability and how commonly it's used. And as of right now, if there were adverse effects or signals from overconsumption over long durations, I believe we would be seeing or hearing about them, because right now in many countries, so for instance, in Uttar Pradesh, which is a state in India of 210 million people, the health ministry there has distributed ivermectin to all the households. In many South American countries right now, health ministries have distributed hundreds and hundreds of thousands of doses of ivermectin. In one city alone in Brazil, in July, they distributed 1 million doses. And so my sense is that it is being taken repeatedly and chronically, and as yet I'm not aware of any adverse effects of that. And I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't, just because of its incredible safety track record.
That is such good news. Is this ball game over? Does this mean we don't need to wait for these miracle drugs, these expensive vaccines?
The thing about vaccines is there's 2 problems with them, particularly in this country. Number one, the history of other coronavirus vaccines are miserable. They haven't gotten past the animal testing stage. And even in other more recent vaccines like dengue, they've been associated with actually widespread harm in certain subpopulations. I don't know that a potential coronavirus vaccine for this pandemic is going to be any better. And even if it had some efficacy, my sense is, given this country and its perceptions of vaccines, you'd have significant portions of the population who wouldn't want to take it just as a rule, and then others, almost like me, who would be very, very cautious, and I would want that safety data to be profound and very much accumulated before I subjected myself or my family to a vaccine. And for that to happen, it's going to take a while. And so for ivermectin, which again, when I talked about the evidence, it's showing decreased rates of transmission. It's plummeting your possibility of getting it if you have an exposure to someone who has COVID-19. If you're a healthcare worker, the rates are plummeting. And so we know it has a preventative possibility in getting, and which would rival the impact of any vaccine because of the reasons that I said. The vaccine's going to be late, and I don't think they're going to be widely adopted, whereas this one I think is a much easier sell, so to speak.
I agree with them. I think the health experts have put too much weight on a vaccine. They put all their eggs into the vaccine basket. I think there's no guarantee a vaccine will work. I think, Dr. Fauci himself has been somewhat skeptical. The efficacy, he said, maybe 70% if we get one. And you have to vaccinate almost the whole country in order to get enough immunity. And that's not going to happen. So, even if we do get a vaccine, it doesn't mean that we can throw all the other measures away. We still need to wear masks. We still need a social distance. And there's still an enormous role for the iMask and Math Plus protocol. A vaccine is not going to be the magic answer to this question if it provides any protection.
I just want to ask a few more things that some people who have been on our social media pages have been asking. One is, what's the best way to protect asthmatics at home? Any preventive measures for them with this disease?
I'm a pulmonologist. I don't know that I would offer anything else to them than what we're already offering. I think they're, depending on their age and other comorbidities, that they're at somewhat increased risk of poor outcome with this disease. But I think our protocol and our recommendations from what Dr. Marik very nicely outlined, which is, just the social measures, the social distancing, the masks wearing, some of the fortification of our vitamin levels to protect us for if we do fall ill, when those vitamins get rapidly consumed, and they can harm us if we go into an illness with these deficiencies. And so I don't think there would be anything else that I would add for an asthmatic. They can stay on their medicines, and I wouldn't change any other approach.
Some other people are asking things about what other natural agents like black walnut that act similarly to ivermectin, should they be involved or taken regularly?
I have, we really try to stick with the science, what we know about the physiology, the activity, the mechanisms of action, the dosings around medications, and it's a very complex business. When you bring up things that I have no training on, where there's just really not a lot of published evidence or experimentation with, then we really lie in the realm of the theoretical and sometimes the fantastical. I mean, some of the claims around things that have never even been tested or tried or documented in experiments seem a little incredible to me. And so I don't even know what black walnut is. And for experience with that, you'd have to get someone who's used that for a long time. And I would still ask for data.
There are thousands of so-called remedies that are available on the internet to treat COVID. Thousands. And I think people must be very cautious. It has to be based on science and cumulative evidence. And I would be very, very wary of these magical cures that have been promoted on the internet. And some of them are just so fantastical that it is just truly hard to believe, but people follow them. So I think you have to base it on science. You have to understand the risk-benefit ratio, and I would limit it to those interventions that we know are of benefit. There are people doing weird stuff like nebulizing hydrogen peroxide. I mean, all kinds of stuff, hyperbaric medicine, all kinds of herbs and things. I think these are potentially very dangerous because they detract from what we know works. If something can be shown to scientifically work and there's enough cumulative evidence, that's fine. If you look at vitamin D, there's overwhelming evidence. In fact, it's overwhelming. I think with ivermectin, the body of evidence is extremely strong. And I think people must stay away from these magical cures which are going to detract from what we're trying to do.
What about the flu? Does this eye mask plus protocol protect against the flu? Is there a chance that people can just use this and not get a flu shot? Either one of you?
So that is a good question. I would still recommend masks. I would still recommend a flu shot. Sometimes we're not sure if patients have flu or COVID, and it can be difficult to distinguish. And some patients may indeed have both. And we know the COVID test is not highly sensitive. So what I would say is treat them like they have COVID. It just so happens that ivermectin has broad spectrum antiviral activity, and we think it may have activity against the influenza virus. So it's a very safe drug, has no contraindications. So I would say if you think you have COVID, treat them as if they have COVID, give them vitamin D, give them quercetin, give them zinc, and give them ivermectin.
Yeah, and I would say on the science part, that going back to a statement I made earlier, which is that, you know, that first study that came out showing that it had sort of in vitro activity against SARS-CoV-2, SARS-CoV-2 is only the latest in a line of viruses for which ivermectin has shown in vitro activity against replication. The list is actually quite long. There's about 10 or 11 studies on different viruses in which ivermectin has some theoretical observed activity against it. So what Paul said is correct. It appears to be a broad antiviral agent. However, we don't have clinical data in those other viruses. The only thing we have right now is this rapidly emerging clinical data for SARS-CoV-2. But my hopes would be that it could prove helpful against flu, but we would need more clinical data to say that.
Last question. Do you foresee ivermectin to become available for all? And do you see the iMask Plus and the Math Plus protocols that you've developed gaining momentum worldwide?
I'm not really sure what the pathway is to get a drug that's, you know, prescription only available for all, if there's some sort of emergency use pathway. But you know, I do know this: desperate times require desperate measures. And this pandemic, we are losing. You know, the social interventions impacts, they're not being followed by all. Not everyone's wearing masks, and I think too many people are suffering. And the rates just keep climbing. I mean, Europe is now going under rolling lockdowns again. And so we do need probably a new population-wide intervention. And my hopes are that ivermectin will prove to be that one. But I think obviously we would need more people to look at this. We would need to share more data. One of the things that I really would hope is, as more attention is paid on ivermectin, is that the governments and the health ministries could get together and really look at this epidemiologic data, because what's happening in so many regions of the world is what I recall, and there are natural experiments going on where huge proportions of the population are taking ivermectin. The rates appear to be plummeting in terms of transmission and case fatality. And so I think there might be immense amount of valuable evidence that could guide you know, our health societies in trying to treat and reverse this pandemic.
I think we've said it all. Dr. Pierre Kory, Dr. Paul Marik, thank you so much for taking the time to explain this to all of us. And this is very, very exciting. I'm certainly taking my vitamins, and I just cannot thank you enough. For those of you who have been watching, we're going to get this out to the world in many ways. We will send it to the authorities. Hopefully they'll pay attention, and hopefully they, like you and like your physicians, will go to the website to read the medical evidence. It's on F for Frontline COVID-19 Critical Care Alliance. That's the group. FLCCC.net is the website, and the medical evidence is there. Thank you. Thank you for watching.
So I have been talking about ivermectin for a while. And the reason why I knew about it is because of the research groups I'm in. And I actually have a document that states over 110 countries have been using this in trials for the last 5 months. And not a single negative thing is in these documents. So I hope that hearing it from someone else's mouth besides me or some of the guests, hearing the founder, the guy who created the Math Plus protocol, which has been saving thousands upon thousands of lives in hospitals, that you take the time to watch, share, comment. This is an all-out pandemic, and we need all the help we can get. So I hope and I pray that this gets reached out on my page, the Hope for Humanity page, the Dan the Messenger page, Mom Squad. It doesn't matter. This is about saving lives, and I'm just flabbergasted. They're going to be doing a interview or a live press conference on Friday about this, about the new change in the Math Plus to the iMask protocol, and they're going to be talking about ivermectin, which is a generic drug, which is cheap, which they've been using since, I guess he said 1987. All you got to do is go to my timeline, and you'll see I've shared ivermectin over and over. My cousin, my brother, I've shared it with everybody I possibly can early on. So they know this can be an early treatment protocol. They know it can be a prophylactic, preventative, and they listed all the vitamins and stuff you should be taking along with it. So I hope that this helps any of my friends out there. I hope that this gets out there like the virus itself, that share, spread, save lives. If you can save one person's life with this video, then I've done my job. All I'm trying to do. I've been going through so much myself personally as a long hauler, someone who's been dealing from a recovery from a massive accident. It's been brutal. And I wish I would have had this information early on. It would have saved me a lot of my pain, a lot of things that have been going on. So I hope as patriots who share this, I hope as concerned citizens that if you're an anti-vaccine person, you don't want the vaccine, well, share the fuck out of this. If you're worried about these vaccines, share the hell out of this video, because this is medicine from epidemiologists, virologists, frontline workers, doctors that created protocols that are saving lives now. Don't wait till later, start now. And you heard him say at the very beginning of this that if you get COVID-19, treat it aggressively. Don't act like it's a cold or flu and go home. Become your own advocate for treatments. It's all listed in here. Thank you.